Welcome to the role of nonprofits in the Montana economy. My name is Brody Mall. I'm a CEO of Mission Mountain Enterprises. We're a program for people with developmental disabilities in Lake County. I'm a board member for the Montana Nonprofit Association. I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker today. Larry Swanson was a guest at our Folsom Rotary Club here in the last couple of years. He really opened a lot of eyes to some of the demographic changes and things that are going on in our state, in western Montana, and really made me think twice about how we're going to be proceeding in our caregiving atmosphere. So it's really stimulated a lot of thought in my mind and what we do in our organization. But Larry is a PhD economist and director of the O'Connor Center for the Rocky Mountain West at the University of Montana. The O'Connor Center is a regional studies and public education program at UM established in the early 90s. Dr. Swanson is a frequent source and speaker around the state and region on economic affairs and challenges. So, welcome, Larry Swanson.
What I'm going to do is just kind of quickly go through what change looks like in Montana, looking at both the demographics of the state. If I were to identify one single thing that is going to have the greatest impact in the most areas over the next 15 years in Montana, it's going to be our age shift, and it's going to be dramatic. We're just at the front edge of a big swing of the population over into much older age categories. But we're also sort of simultaneously right now going through echo. Does anybody know what I mean by echo? It's this upswing in births, and depending on where you're from, all of a sudden, you go out to the Missoula farmers market, for example, and you see all these babies being taken around, and we're into this kind of upswing largely because the kids of boomers are now having kids themselves. And if you look back over time, when do you think Montana's peak in total births was in our history? Last year? Year before last? 10 years ago? What's your guess? 1955. And so if you go back and look at how that bubble of births then played out over time, it led to a growing population, a growing labor force. It's the boomer group that then had kids themselves, and those kids led to record enrollment in our university system, on our high schools and our elementary schools a few years back. But we're now going through a whole nother cycle of that. It's in front of us. And so I'll kind of walk through that. And I just got done working on a project looking at enrollment projections for Missoula County. And Missoula has went through 15 years of enrollment decline in their elementary schools and about 12 years of enrollment decline in their middle schools. And they're now in the midst of 5 years of enrollment decline in their high schools. And they've got about another 8 or 9 years ahead of them in enrollment decline in their high schools. But they're now starting to add to their early grade enrollment because of echo. And then we see that as this plays out by 2025 or 2026, we'll actually get back to the same enrollment population after 2020 that we had 5 and 6 years ago here in the county. So we're going to go through these cycles. But Missoula is only one of about 8 or 9 counties in the entire state that are experiencing echo. You could very well live in an area that's having no echo at all. Now, how can some areas have echo and some areas not have it? It all depends on young adults, where the young adults are, where they're staying, where they're moving to. Montana, if we've got one Achilles heel, and we probably have many, but if I had to identify one, it's our inability to retain young people. We get them back sometimes, but we don't retain them, and we don't easily recruit them. So if you're in a part of the economy that's, you've got employees that are retiring and you're trying to replace these folks, and you've got a growing business and you're trying to add to your younger workforce, it's a competitive battle. And we're going through an economic slowdown right now, but just a couple of years ago we were at 2% unemployment in many areas of Montana. We'll be right back into that in 2 years. Right back into it in 2 years, and we'll be into it for 15 years looking forward. So when you look at what we're going through right now, got to get all the junk out of the way here a second. The blue line is what's happening to national unemployment. And this just goes from 2000, the first quarter, up through the end of August. And so this is the U.S. economy. This is our last recession back here that peaked at 6.3% unemployment. And nationally now we're at 9.7. And here in Montana we're at 6.6. We came off of a peak of 6.7. This is seasonally adjusted unemployment. So what the Bureau of Labor Statistics does, it gathers all this unemployment data from all the states, puts together national numbers, but then they adjust all of the state numbers based on the seasonality of employment in those various areas. So that's what this looks like, and you can see that since this point right here, 2001, June, Montana's unemployment rate has been below the country's. And if you go back, and I couldn't put it on here, but through most of our history, Montana's unemployment rate was ordinarily higher than the national unemployment rate. We had a rough and tough, roly-poly cowboy economy back into the 90s, 80s, and on back, and it had very high levels of unemployment. It was a very insecure economy. Basically, since this point on, our economy is, from an unemployment standpoint, is more stable than the national economy. This is putting the seasonality back in. So here we take out the seasonality, here we put it back in. And so what these swings are is just during the course of a year, what happens to unemployment in Montana. So our low levels of unemployment ordinarily are in August and September, and our high levels of unemployment are January, February. So now we're going through a stimulus program. A couple of weeks ago, only about 10% of that stimulus money in Montana was actually out on the street. What do you guys doing? There he goes. Where was I? So, this is the up and down ratcheting of our unemployment rate, and you can see that over time we've went from highs of up to 6% to 5% to 4% and lows all the way down to, these are historic lows, 2.4% statewide, and that was going into the nationwide recession, which started back in December of 07, okay? So we powered through the first 6 or 7 months of the national economic slowdown, didn't even know if it was going to come to Montana. And then basically the slowdown hit last fall, and it hit because of the banking crisis, and everybody got scared. People quit spending money.
Just, no. Oh, not at all.
We have We have a sophisticated system here. We'll just keep going. But anyway, so you can see that when the national economy then went into this precipitous increase in unemployment, reaching a high of 9.7, and this is the thing that's scaring the Jesus out of everybody, because once you start approaching double-digit unemployment nationally, that's a pretty frightening thing, and you can see that Montana was following the nation into this, but we peaked out at 7%, and that's been last February, March, and then we fell until about May, and then this is the August number right here. So once we got into summer, rather than continuing our decline, as we usually do here, we're starting to go a little bit sideways. It sort of looks like similar times in history, though. And we'll probably then, when the September number comes in, we'll see unemployment come down a little bit more. October, probably sideways, but when we get into November, December, those unemployment rates will start rising again. And what that means is if you're in an area with an unemployment problem, or you're in an organization dealing with problems related to unemployment, our ability to sort of continue to reduce this is going to be pushed back into next spring. So in other words, we'll go into fall a little bit lower, but in November, December, just because of the seasonality we have, unemployment will begin to rise again. That doesn't mean things are falling apart. It just means that's the seasons of the economy, and it means that you're going to have to get people, if you're working with people in that situation, through into March and April before we start seeing employment pick back up again, at least wise seasonally, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind, and that means that a lot of our recovery is going to be in the spring and summer of next year, and I think we'll probably be almost all the way back. And that means the year after that, we'll start pushing our way back into this pattern right here. When we move into an economy with these extremely low unemployment rates, it starts really creating opportunities, because we've had a lot of economic growth in Montana and throughout the Rocky Mountain region. We've had a lot of employment growth and a lot of income growth, but a lot of people and families haven't necessarily benefited from it yet. That takes time and it takes skills. So there's a real premium being placed on workforce development, skills enhancement, training, lifelong learning. And why is lifelong learning so important? Because we have an older workforce, and our economy is always changing. And so our educational institutions are slowly, and I mean slowly, moving out of this mindset that education is about young people. It's about people at all ages, and 10 years from now, we'll have a much different educational system than we have now. High schools are now working on what they call career pathways, and it's basically to try to get students, probably in their sophomore year and no later than that, already thinking about what they're going to do after their senior year. In other words, giving them a little more preparation, not channeling them narrowly into career paths, but sort of customizing their education as they get into their last couple of years around probably where they're headed post-high school. So that's career pathway. And then your colleges of technology and your community colleges are now working on how to coordinate that better, and then they're also then looking the next tier up, coordinating with your four-year institutions and what have you. And slowly this thing will evolve into a system of lifelong education. So you see, anyway, I could get off on that for a half hour, and I won't do that. This is, if we look across the country at states where our unemployment levels were last August when anxiety really struck, but you've got the two Dakotas, Nebraska and Montana. These are the lowest unemployment rates in the country, really going into the depths of this economic slowdown. So in that we were in a much better position going in we've held up better, and our unemployment rate currently is over 3 percentage points lower than nationally. And so it's just a matter of where you start a lot of times. And all of the Rocky Mountain states, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, Idaho, they're pretty high up in this. And when you kind of look at where we started going into the slowdown, all this is it just shows us that unemployment tends to be concentrated in some areas of the country. Michigan, going into the current recession, was already operating at 10% and higher unemployment. So that means when they went into the slowdown, they started pushing 12, 13, 14%, that type of thing. And then they had a lot of people dropping out of the labor force, huge problems. But also you can look over to the coast there, Oregon, Washington, California. They're really not doing well at all through this. Oregon has just been particularly hard hit. You can see these areas of the south. And so when you get over to our part of the country, these lighter colored counties, that means we had very low unemployment rates, not just in Montana, but throughout the larger interior west region. One reason for that is that this region of the country has seen tremendous economic growth and has the fastest growing income base in North America. When you look at total personal income and growth since 1990, that's where the highest income growth has occurred. Yep. We'll get into that. And then if we track this through time, these are county average annual unemployment rates for October of 06 through September of 07, November of 07 through October of 08, December of 07 through November of 08, March of 08 through February of 09, April of 08 through March of 09, July through June of 09. And so you can see that as the slowdown has occurred, if you look at Montana, see, it's like water seeping into the basement. And we've held up better. A lot of people want to take credit for how well Montana's economy has done, but it's just because of where we are and where we were going into this. And this whole interior west area has held up well. Now, if this thing continues and continues, you can see that that process will continue as well. But you can see that the west coast is in dire straits. One of the things to keep in mind is that whenever this part of the country suffers economically for an extended period of time, it tends to translate directly into migration patterns. And the last time we got a big burst in migration into Montana, I mean a real high level, early 90s through the mid 90s, that's when the California economy was in about a 5 or 6 year slump. So we'll probably see a pickup in migration into the area. This just looks at the core problem of the current slowdown, and this just takes metropolitan counties throughout the country, and it asks how many foreclosures do you have in November of 08. The red areas, you've got a housing unit in foreclosure for every 10 to 250 housing units. So it could be as high as 10% or just 1 per 250. So dark red areas is where the housing problem is most heavily concentrated. So where is it? It's California, Nevada, Arizona. Colorado's got a bit of it. Florida, very bad. Michigan, Ohio, okay? If we look at housing growth going through time, when we went into the 90s and we saw a lot of growth in population, housing really took off in western Montana. There wasn't a lot of that in the 80s though. And so where you've seen extended long-term periods of housing growth leading into this current problem tied back to housing, that's where you see the foreclosures being the highest. So Montana sort of, we were in a housing bubble, but at a much lower level for a shorter period of time, and so we did not overshoot the housing market, and that's why housing values have largely held in Montana. At least one of the reasons. This is then overall population growth. So if you look at the 80s versus the 90s versus since 2000, this part of the country is now being referred to as Third Coast. And so in the development of the United States, First Coast Atlantic, Second Coast Pacific, Third Coast Rockies. And so you've got very fast growth, a lot of in-migration into that interior west. And so we see this growth. It's not everywhere, and you can see it from the Flathead down to Bozeman and the Gallatin area, and then around to the Billings area, and then south of Billings, the Red Lodge area. That's where growth was concentrated. And then more recently, growth has slowed a bit. There's a lot fewer of these dark red counties. What happened is growth kind of went everywhere for a time, and now it's becoming more selective. It's sort of picking and choosing. And so that's the pattern that you're going to see. This is population growth for states from 1990. Nevada at the top, Arizona, and then you can see these three Rocky Mountain states, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado. Montana is down here, but if Montana was two states, west and east, west would be at the top of the chart and east would be at the bottom of the chart. So by splitting it, we end up in close to the middle. The same is the case with Wyoming. If you look at where this third coast lies, and it's really where the Rockies lie, this is just a outline of the various mountain ranges of the North American Rockies. And this then puts some additional features on this. We've got all of these public lands. These public lands have added to the mountains and become these magnets for people. You look at all the white areas, those are private lands. And so what you have here with this relatively fast growth in certain portions of this area here is it's concentrating and it's creating urban places. We're much more urban than we think we are. We tend to have a rural political mentality, largely mythological, when in fact we are increasingly an urban society in a mountain region. And so and our political culture is about 30 years behind our economy and most of our social and cultural change. It just takes a long time for the political culture to catch up. When you look at this, though, we're also concentrating this in such a way that we're kind of a region under the illusion of wide open spaces. So in other words, when people move in, these land values have got bid up very quickly, not only because people are coming, but because all of those white areas are surrounded by all of those green and other colored areas, meaning that if I buy 20 acres in the Bitterroot, I get thousands of acres all around me, and so that then further bids up land values. So we're into a period in which land values now reflect not only the scarcity of land where growth is occurring, but the value that is placed on private lands because of their proximity to all of these wide open spaces. That has also kind of carried us through this downturn in housing because those values are not decreasing, they're increasing. They're just going to become more and more and more. We look at the 5 states that largely encompass this Rocky Mountain area. These are their annual growth rates dating back to 1980 through 08. That top chart is just annual percentage growth for Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Montana is that blue line there. And what that tells you is that these areas are walking in step, which means this is a region. Population change on a year-to-year basis is kind of following a similar path across the entire area. And when you compress these into a single line, which is what this purple line is, we see that our growth rate peaked in 93, and we juxtapose this with California's annual growth. You can see that annual growth in California, which peaked in 89 and fell through 84, is what spurred the in-migration. So why were they coming to Montana? California. And so why are they going to be coming to Montana going forward? California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona. So these areas, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, parts of Colorado, Utah, we're going to continue to see this, and you can see that as California goes, largely we go. And when you also then lay down on this area, what kind of urban, rural places are these? And all we're doing here is the very largest urban areas are the purple ones, Denver down to Pueblo there. Light purple are close-lying surrounding counties that are closely linked to those urban centers. The orange ones are second-tier metro places and their surrounding areas. The blue ones are third-tier, and we only have one third-tier metro center in the entire region, and that's Billings. But we have a lot of these green and yellow places, and those are large and small regional population centers, many of which don't even meet metropolitan status of the U.S. Census Bureau, but they have become cities. And because they don't meet all of our traditional definitions of cities, they tend to not think of themselves as cities, which is one of the biggest mistakes they can make, because much of our economic growth that's now occurring throughout this area is urban-based economic growth. If you look, when we get into it, I'll show you that. If you didn't have these small cities, you wouldn't have about half of that economic expansion, because it's sort of tied to how these places are developing economically. The other thing about this is that while we've got 7 sort of regional population centers in Montana of varying sizes, we have no single dominant one. And we've got a lot of our areas outside of these that are closely tied to these urban centers. So urban-rural relationships within Montana and working arrangements are increasingly important. And then outside of these, in those kind of light gray areas, we really have a very small percent of our population. In fact, you kind of look at this entire region here and kind of line up the cities from largest to smallest. You can see where we fit. Denver, Salt Lake, very big, and then Colorado Springs, Pueblo, and Spokane, Boise, Fort Collins, but then we get to Billings, and its region-wide population of about 192,000. That's that entire blue area. And then you look at Missoula, these are now roughly equivalent. So that's why Missoula, when you look at its surrounding population, while Missoula is a considerably smaller city than Billings, when you put together the surrounding area population, you have roughly equivalence in terms of that population. Then you can sort of work your way on down. Yep. Well, the reason why Helena is so small is that Helena is wedged in. And so literally you've got Great Falls, Missoula, Billings, a fast-growing Bozeman, and then Kalispell sort of wedging in around Helena, so that Helena's trade area is actually quite small. And if you look at the size of the retail sector of Helena, it's small in relation to these other places. Its hospital and healthcare service area is small. So it really gets down to where you sort of bump up against your nearest sort of competitor type thing. Helena is a great place for a state capital because it's sort of a gathering place. It's small enough that it doesn't feel threatening to all of those surrounding political interests, so they can come in there and not look at it as a threatening place. So that works out from a lot of standpoints. But anyway, here's how they line up. Here's their percent population growth. St. George, Utah is the fastest growing. It's one of these small regional population centers. Boise, Fort Collins. Now Boise is like an emerging metropolitan area. A lot of things happening there. Then you work your way. Bozeman comes up there, Grand Junction, Salt Lake, Denver, what have you. And then here's Missoula, Kalispell, Helena, Billings. And down here we've got Great Falls. Now, why is Great Falls so far down the list? What is it the center of? What's its region? Agricultural. And almost every one of the counties surrounding Great Falls, what's happening to population? It's decreasing. So as the vine shrinks, the grapes shrink. And that's Great Falls is just kind of treading water. Then you get down to Butte, and Butte is one of, actually within the Rocky Mountains themselves, it's the only city with a declining population, regional population. Now why is that? See, the growth has been amenity driven. And so Butte is one of these places that was, pardon the phrase, so damaged by the last 100 years of what occurred there that it's not participating in the current spurt in growth, and it's trying to figure that out. It's working at it, and it'll eventually figure it out, but it's almost trying to walk on both sides of the fence. Here's real income growth over the period. Bozeman very high, and this is important to note because this is adjusted for inflation, and again, income doesn't grow at the same rate everywhere. It distributes itself, and you can see what the pattern is, but much of our economic expansion is settling into smaller cities. The economy today really likes small cities. It likes middle-sized cities. The old economy liked big cities because it was manufacturing based and it liked big workforces, and it just gravitated to those urban centers. This one is more amenity-based, more footloose, more service-based, and it's dispersing. Okay? Yeah.
Income, there's like the trend or the common belief that these people are coming here and bringing their money in, and my new neighbor's reporting, $300,000 a year, and I'm making my same maybe tenth of that, if that, How does that affect those numbers there?
The numbers that
one previous slide that you had up, where it said like Bozeman and a couple of those or Missoula, where your bistro has a PhD or a master's in that sort of.
A whole lot of people that live in Montana are not residents of Montana, so their income does not get counted in Montana. If they move to Montana and become a resident of Montana, we count their income. But I can tell you most of our income growth in the state has been in employment earnings, and it hasn't been in people bringing wealth from somewhere else. Yeah, there's a lot of economic mythology. And mythology is convenient because then you can identify bad people and good people. Exactly. I've been in Montana since 1988, and I've taken the ice pick to the ice brick of economic mythology as long as I can, and you can only get a little chip at a time. It holds up very well. That mythology, though, it really does hurt us, because if you're going to be successful economically, you have to start with, you have to adapt to change. And if you're stuck in place, that means you can't successfully adapt to change. And so you have to always be working with communities in such a way that they realize they cannot stand in one spot. And so they've always got to be kind of reevaluating, rethinking. For me, though, out of that process, there's all sorts of win-wins. You can keep what you value, but you can still adjust and adapt to change. If you're just sticking where you're at, though, you're stuck. That's usually what happens every 2 years in Montana and the hell in the legislature. You talk about stuck in time. When you look at employment growth then across this third coast, this is what employment change looks like across that entire Rockies. And then this is what employment growth looks like across Montana. See, we're not an island, and our economy is largely changing like the larger region. And the larger region, as it's changed like this, it's had the fastest growing personal income base in the country. But look at where the employment growth is concentrated. So what's another myth? That our economy is going to hell in a handbasket because it's concentrated in services. Nonprofits, really nonprofits, and we've had this discussion, they always try to figure out, where are we? You're everywhere. I mean, the best way to think about nonprofits, you're everywhere. I mean, you actually are. I mean, education, where is it? Where is any nonprofit organization that's doing something in housing or the arts or whatever it might be? You're everywhere because you become an enabler. You become you're adding to. And so sometimes when we try to pull out the piece, measure it, we're kind of losing a lot of actually what's going on with nonprofits. If everything only happened because there was a profit to be made, a lot of things would not be happening. And a lot of profit making wouldn't be happening to the very same degree. So, but here's essentially the propositions. And this is the transformation that we're on. We've been on for the last 20 years. Advances in information technology. This is junk in another 10 years. This is just 5 years. And so this is moving very, very quickly. Another 10 years will be so virtual it will be crazy. But it'll be virtual in a way that you feel like you're together. But what this is doing is if you put together all these advances in information technology and then communication infrastructure, all this fiber optics and all of this broadband, along with the emergence of a service-based economy, steady aging of the U.S. population, rapid increases in non-labor and more mobile sources of income that can just simply move around. They've redesigned the workplace. See, when I was an economist in the early 80s, I did not have a PC. Why? I could do it faster on a sheet of paper. And you get your data on a little floppy disk, you put it in and you get 10 numbers. Now you get every number ever created in 5 seconds. I mean, it's incredible. And so the work I can do on a daily basis, I couldn't do in 6 months back in the early 80s. So, and you multiply all of this across the economy, and then look at how it's completely transformed the workplace. I mean, you can't go into an office where 70 to 80% of the workforce, and this is just the typical situation, is not sitting at a PC, okay? So you get into this thing where they've redesigned the workplace, they've also reorganized the geography of economic activity. So all that's changed, and reshuffled patterns of migration and population growth. All that's changed. So in short, today's economy is more footloose. Both people and jobs move around more freely, new patterns of migration. The old economy encouraged urbanization and suburbanization. The new economy encourages growth to occur mostly in places where people want to live. In the old economy, people follow jobs. In the new economy, jobs follow people. And that's the story of growth in Montana over the last 2 decades.
Around the economy and the retiring baby boomers.
Yeah.
Folks are, the whole idea of jobs and people, but also the retirement where folks aren't working or they're volunteering or part-time or that sort of thing. How does that play in? I've heard the argument made around this demographic shift of baby boomers to Intermountain states, this third coast idea that they have this old relationship with the landscape, from a more landscape environmental approach to say, hey, I grew up in Blue Riders and open spaces and this idea that this is quality of life right here.
Right.
So I worked my whole life and I'm going to move to these places, some that are in bright red now, but also that are not.
Sure.
And so how is that playing in for folks who aren't working or they don't care if a job follows them or not? Just that when it comes to a demographic, that seems like a factor in Montana.
It just depends on where you go, but what you're seeing more out of this pattern is just the emergence of cities. They may want to go out on that landscape, But what we're finding is that these mid-sized cities and their immediately outlying non-metro areas are where the growth is concentrated. And so in Montana, and this then becomes kind of the recipe. I'm going to kind of skip around your question there, and we'll kind of get to it here as we go. It gets down to a situation where now what is most important, if you want to understand where economic opportunity is increasing, if you don't have a high-quality community, you're not in the game, period. Why? Because I don't have to go there. I don't have to live there. And so in a footloose economy, those become the losers. So that means that economic development and community development, there are no lines there. They become increasingly part of the same prescription. Now that's a problem. In Montana, a lot of our economic professionals are not community development people. I'm sorry, they're not. The quality of your workforce, increasingly wherever you see businesses go, what's the first question they have after they've ID'd a community that they really like? Workforce. Has this place got a workforce? Where do we spend a lot of our workforce money now that's spent publicly? We'll package up a lot of that to offer to a big company who says we'll come to Butte. And the public money will be $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 for workforce training. The reality is most of our job growth and business growth is not big companies going to Butte. It's small companies adding employees or startups, and as they grow, they need workers. How do you do workforce development when it's spread all over? Just think about it a little bit. I mean, it gets real easy if I'm sitting in Helena and all I got to do with my workforce money is spend it every time a big company wants to come to Montana. How do I spend it if I want to have a dispersed but focused and customized workforce development program in Montana? We don't know how to do it. And we're not doing it now, and we will figure it out over the next 10 years with the people we have now or with new people. Sometimes you got to get new people. And then the quality of your surrounding environment. The environment just matters. If you don't have a high quality place, you can have a nice town, but if it doesn't all come together. So that becomes kind of a recipe. And then you get into this situation where, although most forces driving the economy are supra-community, we've got all this discussion of globalization. I can tell you about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when you'd go around from community to community talking about economic development, among leadership, the common expression was, we have no control over our economy. Our economy is, somebody else runs it. And so there was this feeling of helplessness, a lack of sort of self-determination. But what we have now is, so much of what really counts is back in your hands. So you think about that, we're still going global, but much of what matters in economic development is within our control. Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's many times how you have to do something. You got to do something. That's part of our problem. See, we have a certain rigidity as you work from, and this is in Europe, if you go around Europe now, and I'm starting to connect with some of the organizations that work in community and economic development around the world, but they have this phrase they call joining up leadership. So what they do is if you have a community where you've got your high school board over there, an elementary board, and you've got your chamber over here, and you've got your city council over here, and your county commissioners over here, and then you've got your workforce people over there, And your economic development people over here, what you find in many communities is those guys, if that person from that table gets up and goes over there and sits or starts looking over their shoulders, what do they like it? They don't like it. Everybody's got their little fiefdoms. And so what we have is a leadership base that's partitioned off from each other, subtly, informally, and formally. And what you have to do as a community is join up that leadership base into a common discussion, because you can't figure out how that nonprofit piece is going to fit in if you're not working on the same sort of strategies. And those strategies themselves have been linked up. And what I find in Montana, most of our communities and their leadership and their decision-making bodies are fractured.
Yeah.
Do you guys look at this from an anthropological standpoint? I mean, you are in one way, but I'm thinking about cultural shift. And so, say open source software. We've heard a lot of this conference about open sourcing, basically what we're doing. And you're talking about open sourcing communities and economies. And so is that, it's representative of a cultural shift on this? We're moving away.
I think it's almost all cultural.
Yeah.
I used to, in economics, they used to teach economic anthropology.
Right.
And so
You
you
can't separate the two.
but you know, we quit studying that 40 years ago because it wasn't important anymore. That's the truth. We quit, most of the stuff goes back to the 30s and 40s.
What you put up there suggests to me, and I don't know if there's been any work done, that if you look at the nonprofit sector and run it against those things,
They're all over.
they're all over, but some are going to be more attractive and more successful, quote unquote, like land trusts, things that deal with
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
environmental quality, why people are coming here. They will be supporting those organizations that enhance that quality of life.
Arts groups, workforce groups.
So it means also that there's some other organizations in the nonprofit sector that may have to struggle much harder. Because, I mean, I just went to the Prickly Pear Land Trust gala, and they had 500 people there, you know, participating in major auction activity.
Well, it's curious. People look for these opportunities to have that big discussion. How often do you have that big discussion in front of a city council or county commissioners? You go to an important meeting of the county commissioners, you got 5 people. See, we've killed this off, and so we got to rethink this stuff. And we really do, because ultimately it gets down to how well you're going to accomplish things, how well you're going to do things. Do you ever get to a point where you've got some sense of a common vision? Most places don't. Well, you can't have sort of a functioning community absent a common vision across key leadership and decision-making bodies. So that's the thing we battle up against all the time, and we try to do our job in spite of it. What I try to do is just get leadership talking to each other. So you talk about simple things like just have a round table, meet once every quarter, 4 times a year, and have a discussion and talk to each other about what your plans are and what you're going to do. It's amazing how you can start freeing up some of this thinking if you do that. But I got to move here. This is the kind of the pieces of the economy as you look at Montana employment. These are now by NAICS, that's North American. We've come up with new codes for looking at the economy. But you look at our largest employer, it's retail, trade, healthcare. And you can see where each of those were in 97 versus 07. And there's construction, and so all of this population growth has created a lot of housing expansion and construction, accommodations and hotels and food service, local government. This professional and technical services areas like engineers, accountants, lawyers, all of that stuff. And then you work your way on down. This is then employment growth. All we do is just subtract one from the other. And so we've had a heavy increase in construction employment. And now in the midst of this slowdown, that's getting hammered. That's about 1/3 of what it was, okay? Where are we replacing that? And one of the biggest fears I had as we went through this transition is that we're going to get a lot of fuel, economic fuel, out of increased construction, a lot of jobs, but that's not sustainable at those high levels in perpetuity. Construction goes like this. So what we needed to be doing is spending time thinking about, well, as construction comes and goes, where are we building the rest of that employment base within our economy? That takes strategies, working with business, workforce development, and all that stuff. We haven't done that very well in most of Montana. Montana just tries to kind of do little things at a time. And it doesn't look holistically at your economy and then try to figure it out. This is then labor earnings by major sector across the state. And what's the top blue line? It's healthcare. Now, healthcare will grow as fast as our ability to finance it. So that's good and it's bad because we can't sustain that. You cannot sustain an economy where healthcare is growing 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. So we need to be thinking, just like we were talking about construction, healthcare itself is going to level out at some point, although that once you look at these demographics, that's hard to see how that's going to work. This is that construction sector going into 2008 and that fall off. Okay, you see that? So this then is our major sectors of the economy, 2008 versus 98, and this is growth, and healthcare is at the top. What's second? Professional technical services. Now think about these top 2 ones here and the kinds of jobs now that we're creating in the economy. Lots of skills, lots of degrees along with other kinds of mid-skill training and what have you. So over time, as our economy has grown, we've moved from being a natural resource-based economy increasingly to a human resource-based economy. Now, 30 years ago, in a natural resource-based economy, how did policymakers try to improve the economy? What did they invest in? Natural resource development. In a human resource-based economy, and policies want to improve the economy, what do they invest in? And how well do they do that? They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. See, we're in a process of reimagining how we do education. And as we do that, we're going to attract more and more investment into human resources through education, but we're not going to do it out of the current boxes. So that educational system has got to change. It's got to become more responsive, more customized. It's got to work more directly with the change that's underway. And then in the process, it will attract more and more funding. And over time, funding into education would truly represent then an investment in human resources, which would elevate the economy.
All right, along those lines, I haven't seen anything in the data presented so far that substantiates that agriculture is Montana's #1 industry.
It isn't.
Yeah, I mean,
You know, every time I hear somebody say that, I go back to every chart I can look at and I say, where did they come up with that idea? Where did it come from? It's mythology. I hear it out of the State Department of Labor and Industry. It's a nice thing to say when you're out campaigning. So as you look at this, we've moved from a situation where, as a share of total employment, you've got retail trade that'll always be high, healthcare, construction, and other areas. This is then shares of total labor earnings. Healthcare is over 12%. This is net farm income as a share. It's very small. And then this is, where is it? Farm and ranch. There's farm employment as a share of total. I'm going to move quickly, but this is kind of how our economy is changing. If you add professional, technical, financial, and business services all together, they greatly exceed healthcare. And this right here is the story of the last 15 years of economic maturation in the state of Montana. The biggest impact area has been professional, technical, financial, and business services. We've actually added quite a bit to our wholesale trade along with retail trade. Federal and state government are up there, and you can see where healthcare is. This then looks at just growth only from 98 to 2008. This is then personal income total for Montana. So as you look at that, we've worked our way into a $28 billion economy measured in terms of personal income. Labor earnings or employment earnings provide 20 million of that personal income. And this is how much we get from all of our natural resource industries combined. So you can see that while they have been flat across time, adjusted for inflation, all of this rest of the growth in the economy is apparently coming from somewhere else. Yep. Yeah. But in the Rockies, it's the single fastest growing piece of the economy. And it's how we're able to really build out that income base. And it's how we're able to see some, I'm trying to decide, should I go to community college? Should I go to four-year schools? Is there a job out there waiting for me? My son got an engineering degree, so he's in that. I've got another son in law school, so he's in that. Your children, what do you want them to do? I mean, most of these people are studying accounting, or if they're going through the educational system or something. And so that part of the economy is growing, so it provides an elevator for young adults getting educations and plugging into that growing economy. And over time, this right here, I used to work at a place recently that used all of this line to explain all of this. And so what it was this was basic and this was non-basic. And so back here, the multiplier between this and this, when you put all of it together, it used to be 5 or 6, but by the time you got out here, that multiplier was 10. And so I just said one day, we're using less and less to explain more and more. You can't do that. But that's what Montana does with its mythology. So, transfer payments and investment income are the difference between the blue line and the green line. So the blue line's all the employment income. This is then when we break up the economy into all of its pieces. So that big professional and technical services and business services and financial services, that's them up there. So we've got administrative services, bank and credit intermediaries, insurance carriers, membership organizations, securities, commodities, investment, telecommunications, educational services that are private, management services, waste management, publishing industries, broadcasting, et cetera, et cetera. This is then healthcare. Then the yellow ones are various parts of government. And then this is all of your trade sector, including wholesale trade. This is real estate, and this is construction. This is transportation, and this is all of our manufacturing base right down here at the bottom. Now, where do economic developers put almost all of their emphasis in economic development? See, we just don't get it.
Can you just clarify those ones that I can't really read that well that are on the opposite here?
When we break all those big sectors up into small ones, these are the subsectors, and unfortunately I stretched that as far as I could get it to get them all on there, but the teal are professional and business services, the blue are healthcare, this is state and federal and local government, this is all the trade, this is real estate, this is construction in red, the white are transportation, the gray is public utilities, the black is manufacturing. This is, I pulled out oil and gas extraction, petroleum refineries. So these are all natural resource down here, paper, wood, Agriculture. Yeah, probably. Yeah. The North American codes are much better to try to understand a modern day economy than the old codes. So these are pretty good. But nonprofits really, to me, are still sprinkled in all over the place. I mean, they're embedded in a lot of this stuff. And this is then this is just Billings in Yellowstone County. This is just growth in their economy. And then when you put them together into kind of major groupings, so there you have one of the things that we have to do for economic and community development is take each of these major groupings and each of your communities areas, create a workforce group around that cluster and create a business development group around that cluster. Now, why do you have to do that? Because workforce development and business development for each part of our economy is different than another. If we don't do that, if we do business assistance carte blanche and workforce development carte blanche, it's like taking a hammer to a needle. You following me? Now, we're not doing that. We're not sophisticated enough. So we go back to this and we just kind of trace through the growth. I've got 30 minutes. Is everybody doing okay? This is long, so you're all right? There's water back there. We go back to this picture, and so we're just pulling down on Montana and how is this playing out and what have you. This is where the growth has been in our various periods over time. Montana is split. This part of the state is not seeing growth, it's seeing decline, and this part is where the growth has been concentrated. This is also where our cities are, Bozeman, Great Falls, Helena, Butte, Missoula, Kalispell, Whitefish, Billings. But a lot of this area is really just, where's Billings begin and end? Where does Missoula begin and end? Where does Kalispell? See there, to try to treat these as sort of separate, sort of boundary entities doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so when you look at something like this, you can connect the surrounding counties quickly. Now Montana's got 56 counties. How many counties does Montana need? Oh, I'd say 12. I'll be generous. Because when you draw a 50-mile circle around 7 places, in 2000 you have 80% of the population. So you could actually figure out a better way of kind of redrawing the lines for a whole range of things. And when the 2010 census comes out, what will this number be? Smaller or bigger? Be bigger. We'll be up around 85%. So it's because the population sort of concentrates closer. And also as your population ages, it doesn't spread as much as it starts pulling back in, and that's kind of in front of us. So then when you look at population growth across Montana from urban to rural, and I've color-coded these bars. The dark yellow bars are the small regional centers. Blue one is Billings, and the green dark ones are Cascade or Great Falls and Missoula here. So you got Gallatin, Flathead, Missoula, Yellowstone, Lewis and Clark, Cascade, Silverbow. Then you start with your closely linked areas. The first two here are Ravalli and Lake, and that's again why the Missoula area has a larger population or an equivalent population base to the Billings area, because not only do they have a currently large population nearby, but it's growing, okay? And then this is the rest of the state. One county, and that's Glacier County. That's a reservation county. The reservation counties in Montana are literally the only ones adding folks. Even if you go to Sydney, where we've got this oil and gas thing going on, that county is still losing population. But the motels are full. But But see, with the drilling, it's a footloose industry. Drilling now, whereas it used to be sort of you'd come in and then you'd hire folks, it's now this rig just travels around with a traveling crew of workers. So that means that workforce, where does it get assigned ultimately and where does the money go? It goes where those people live. So that's something to keep in mind. But here's total population change. 7 regional centers, places nearby them, and then the rest of the state. So we had statewide population growth of 60,005 and 61,005 in 7 counties. This is then, we just take the total population of places in 2008. There's Yellowstone, Missoula, and you can see where they are. And then this is population change the last 2 years. See, when I told you we're moving into a more focused population growth, and I showed you with the maps, this is what I mean. It's really focusing down on a few places. This is natural population change, just births minus deaths from 2000 to 08. So this is where we're getting some echo. And what are all of these? Yeah, it's the only place you got echo outside of the cities. These are the only places adding to the front end of the pipeline into our elementary and high school systems. Every other place that's not adding that right now in this current demographic, that pipeline is going to continue to dwindle, okay? This is then where migration is adding to the population. So these are the 2 components of population growth, natural change and net migration. So see how concentrated it is? This is where you have growth from migration and decline from migration just in a 1-year period. In all the white counties, not enough change to make a difference. So does it look like Third Coast is still operating? Yeah, it's still operating. It's going into a few places. This is areas where births are greater than deaths or deaths are greater than births. So all of the red had more births than deaths and all of the black had more deaths than births. Just in a 1-year period. What's this? That's Appalachia. Now if you look at how Montana more makes sense, rather than 56 counties, it's probably, we could go 1, 2 subregions in the northwest, 1, 2, 3 subregions in the southwest, 1, 2 in the north central, 1 in the south central, and then 1, 2 in the far east. So that's 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this is how they're growing.
3,000 people
No.
on the last slide. No, one quote, yeah, somewhere on the side, I was just trying to scan.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
Less than 63.
Yeah, so here's actually the line showing their residents right here. So this is Missoula, and we're going out to 2025. And so Missoula is now slightly larger than the 10-county area around Billings. This is Great Falls. It's just flatlined. And then this is Bozeman and Kalispell. And then this is Helena. And then this is Butte. And then you have the rest of the state. That's how it'll be. And it might even be more extreme than that. This is now the demographic part of this. This is the U.S. population counted from under 1 up to 84 in 1990 and then 10 years later in 2000. Everywhere where you see the red line above the blue line, you add it to the population at those ages. And everywhere that the blue line is above the red line, you lost population. So this is the result of that. So then what's this? Boomers, and what's this? Echo. So then as we take this forward, this is the 5-state Rockies. Now why is this deeper nationwide than here in the Rockies? We outgrew the nation as a whole, so we compensated for having less people between the boomer and the echo group across 5 states. Here's Montana. So here's boom, echo, but look at the hole in between, and then look at what's coming behind echo. This was at the time of the 2000 census. This is from, again, 1990 to 2000. Here's from 2000 to 2010. Now the boomers in their 40s and 50s are moving into their 50s and 60s. Here's their kids in their early 20s and early 30s. And then what's this? Echo, echo. So 2010, we see the emergence of echo, echo. And then when I showed you the births minus deaths across the state and which states had more, all of that echo, echo is concentrated in about 8 counties. And then this is, again, 2010 to 2020. So 2000 to 2010, this means that echo, echo in Montana is only about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years wide. Which means it'll peak out, if it hasn't peaked out already, just in a couple more years. How wide is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So our baby boom band is over twice as wide as our echo, echo, which means what's going to happen to the age of the population overall? Our 65 and older population, which is about 129,000 people statewide in 2005, will, by 2030, it'll push about 270,000. So in your mind, you can say it will double over the next 20 years. And as you go from the 90s, current decade, next decade, decade after, the next 2 decades, most of our population growth will be concentrated in the 65 and older population. See, that's how this keeps rippling through your population base. So you get into a situation where the labor force, or the total population of Montana has grown like this, the blue bars. The 18 to 64 population will peak out in sometime between 2010 and 2015. And then the labor force is the yellow bar, which means our labor force to fuel the growth in our economy will peak out in about 2 or 3 years. Which means how do we get continuing income growth, expansion of our economy, if we can't expand our workforce? How do we grow it? Well, this migration is built into these. That's where workforce is. I mean, if you're going to have the same or fewer workers in a growing economy, you've got to train. I mean, when I learned how to do spreadsheet, Excel, I probably increased my productivity in 1 week 4 times. Okay, that's productivity. So how do you get productivity? Skills, education, training. Some of that can be on the job, but what I think over time, and in 10 years, if you're, let's say you're a typical 40-year-old worker, is you at the part of your day or part of your week will be, you will go to a classroom. Education will become more part of ongoing life, and that's lifelong education. That's what Europe is going to fast. That's where they're headed. Who are the last people to want to take us to lifelong education? Come on. Educators. Why? You talk about people that can't think out of the box. I'm sorry. Can't think out of it. So you got to get those folks out of the box. You got to get them out of the box. Again, I think all of this is the role for nonprofits. Is always stirring the pot, keeping the thinking going. Yeah.
No, but I think your earlier point that nonprofits are scattered all over.
Exactly.
Data has been a real barrier around how do we build coherent economic development strategies that build this part of the economy, with the exception of perhaps healthcare. And in Montana, we have a way to help finance capital construction for hospitals. That's the only, because it's so damn big, they have power. That's the only part of the nonprofit economy that can get that kind of low-cost financing for capital construction. So I just...
Partly you need an articulation of all the broad range of nonprofits into clusters. And then as a part of your annual meeting, have cluster discussions. So everybody that somehow touches workforce and community development from a variety of nonprofit entities has some kind of common discussion just as a part of their association here. In other words, we have to figure out ways of linking up these discussions, linking up these strategies and everything else. Because to do them separately is not, it doesn't work that well. Sometimes you can get by with it. This is one of the answers to our tight labor market, and it's just something to be aware of. This is just simply every Darke County, 15% or more of the population is Hispanic. So here's your 1980 map, your 1990 map, this is your 2000 map. When 2010 is put up, I mean, just look at Idaho, here versus there. So the Hispanic population is just now reaching western Montana. Now it's been pulled into other parts. These areas here are meatpacking plants. And the migratory workforce has moved into a lot of those communities with plants. I'm not sure what this is other than the fact that it's a very urbanized area, but when this goes up for 2020, it'll be across western Montana.
The reservations have a tremendous resource and we're not utilizing them. They have 50% unemployment rate and you
Yeah.
said the population is going up, they're increasing in young people.
Right.
Right here within the state.
You know what? You're absolutely right. In reservation communities, you think about it, the ability to buck the trends that are going on in rural Montana. Some of the areas that are going to be last ones standing are going to be some of your reservation communities. Why? Because they have a return flow of people and a fairly high birth rate. But their high unemployment rates are killing them. If they could, what I've found in working with reservations, and I'm not going to try to be insulting here, but they do not link up their leadership. And so if you go into one of those communities, you find that the city doesn't work well with the tribe, the tribal council, or the county, or anybody else. And so although you can go into a tribal community where you have more resources to work with to accomplish things, they are partitioned off and almost fighting with each other over the deployment of those resources. So again, it's the same sort of, how do you link it up, and then how do you use those resources across a common vision? And that's the tough thing. Just about done here. This then looks at Montana's 65 and older population from 2000 to 2030. It'll also double. So double the number, double the percent of the population. We're going to go from 13% of the population 65 and older to 26%. This is then what's going to happen to the projected 10-year population growth rates of the Mountain West states where all of this growth has been concentrated. We look at Colorado, 31% in the 90s, 12%, 9%, and then 10%. Here in Montana, 13, 7, 6, 2. Why does that fall so low to 2% growth? Because we're going to double the number of 65-year-olds in the population. And as a result of that, this is what's going to happen. All of these green counties, 10% or less of their population is 65 and older. Every black county, 20% or more is 65 and older. So you can get out into some places now where 30 to 35% of your population is 65 and older. So this is 80, 90, 2006. What will that map look like in 2015? Over half of the counties in the United States will be black. And in Montana, so you can only imagine, look at 80 and then look at this 26 years later.
So with the overlap of the exodus and knowing if there's less than 63,000, do we just see an increase in ghost town, essentially on the prairies, you know?
What I say is that the communities, rather than declining because of people leaving, will decline because people are dying. And it's outright attrition. So you'll get into a situation where those communities become just less and less and less and less. So this is, you can translate this into schools, you can translate this into a whole lot of things. This is then just, one day my sons asked me, oh, I see all that aging stuff, tell me where the young people are going. So I just asked the computer one day, tell me all of the places in the 48 lower states that had an increase in the young adult population, the population between 25 and 39, being generous. And this is what came up. All of the gray areas had a decrease and all of the green areas had an increase. So how many counties in Montana through the 90s had an increase in their 25 to 39 population? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, since 2000, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
What's the, so I see the Rocky Mountain West trend, but there's a southeastern trend too, and eastern, is there a pat answer for that, or?
When you're over here, you mean?
I'm talking like from Texas and you're moving across the southeast from Texas, you see that?
Well, these are your urban areas and their surrounding areas, and this helps us maybe a little more. What I then said was, okay, tell me the ones not only that had an increase, but tell me the ones that had a increase of 100 or more, and then rank order them from 12%, 6 to 12, and 0 to 6, and this is the ones that emerged. So here's, yeah, but look at, here's Texas. These are your three urban areas. Here's Minneapolis, and going up this way and then down toward Rochester, all along the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and then also Bend. I'm just talking about whatever the computer tells me to talk about. and it, you know, people always say, well, you're fudging, you're trying to get the data to tell you what you're trying to find. No, this is what the data tell you. So your story is as good as mine, whatever that is. And I look at it and whatever it is. You know, I haven't. It just gets so hard to get it on a page. And I noticed the sweatshirt thing. I bet it is. I think there are a lot of stresses and strains that Alaska goes through just because of the way that economy sort of goes like. Here then is their annual births in Montana, again dating back to 57 peak, a bottom in 73, a more recent peak in 82. Now, if you were born in 82, when were you a senior in high school? What? 99? What? 99, and if you look across the state of Montana, when was the peak in high school enrollment? In Missoula, it was 1999. It was right around 99, 2000, right in there. So what this does is, this translates into peak school enrollment out here in 99, but what was happening to the number of births in 99? It hit another trough. So what's this right here? Echo, echo. Is it 5 minutes? So, and then what's this one right here? This is deaths. So now what happens is we go forward and that 65 and older population now doubles and becomes virtually most of your population growth the next 2 decades. We're about 8 years away in Montana where this gray line, as it goes like this, and the green line goes like this, they will intersect. And at that point, statewide, deaths will exceed births. First time in our history. Now, doesn't that scare you? Well, in Europe, there are countries that have been around thousands of years that have went through these cycles 5 and 6 times. So we're a young country that's scared by our shadow. We get frightened by all of these things that old countries have been through many times. But that's going to happen here. And then this is annual births minus deaths for the 7 regional center counties. Those are the teal bars. The 27 counties nearby them, those are the light teal bars. And then the 22 isolated rural counties are the, whatever that color is. So what this is telling you is that essentially our natural population growth is now concentrating in 7 counties, and actually 5, plus a few more. Now what happens when you go to the Montana legislature and present this kind of stuff? They freak out. I love to watch them just freak out. Because it goes against their whole agenda. And what they try to do is they try to stop change. So you start ending up with state aid education that tries to reverse trends. And what do you do when you've got a dwindling number of college-age adults in the state of Montana with tuition? We raise tuition by 5% in our 2 flagship institutions. And what do we do with that 5% tuition increase? Do we spend it all in Missoula and Bozeman where we just increased it? See, imagine that. You got an underfunded education system. You just added to the cost of education for the people attending schools in Missoula and Bozeman, and you give 2% of it back to other institutions. When's that story going to get out?
Really, there are a pretty large number of progressive Democrats and politicians, I should say Democrats, that are paying attention to their numbers.
Well, we got to get things done. We have to do it. You have to start adjusting funding formulas. What the state of Montana could do now that have more impact on anything would simply be, in spite of whatever happens to the number of school-age children and adults, simply increase state aid to education by 2 to 3% a year through the entire cycle, and then on a per-student basis, steadily increasing. So go through the slump, and rather than having formulas that cut off funding like we're doing, and disinvest in education at the very time we're becoming a human resource-based economy, hold funding steady on an annual basis and then increase it on a per-student basis. By a 10 or 12-year period, we'd go from the bottom of the list to the middle, and wouldn't that be a great accomplishment? We'd go to the middle of the list. See, we're at the bottom of the list. No, just leave it all. The taxes, our economy, just increase it at the rate of growth in the economy. I'm not going to tell you to take it from anybody. Just keep it growing at the rate of the economy, and you'll increase on a per student basis what we are investing in our future. But what do? I mean, we've got funding formulas that the smaller you are and the more struggling you are, the more you get on a per student basis. The base fund per system is the same, the base allocation. What? Get real. That's all mythology. See, and so the state cannot advance. We are advancing in spite of our policies when it comes to how do we move the state forward in the midst of this vast economic change. We haven't done it with workforce. I'm sorry, it's not happening. That's where nonprofits can come in. Nonprofits come in and say, okay, we'll try to do this.
You're going to be driving the need to support those people, everything from healthcare to leisure kinds of activities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So, and we've had a growing nonprofit economy in Montana, but we do not have, again, same old story, we do not have the infrastructure to support the nonprofit sector at the level that it needs to be supported. I think a great example is the nonprofit network in Kalispell that Ben talked about today, but why didn't that really come out of the educational system? I mean, Andrea is here from the University of Montana, they're doing their part, but that kind of thing needs to be done throughout the state, plus a variety of other nonprofit support entities, because they're going to have, Montana government depends on the nonprofit sector to pick up a lot of the log. In other places in the country, government tends to do that. But here we're really dependent on the nonprofit sector, and I don't think that is recognized by the legislature. It's still good works and charity. And until we break out of that mindset, we're going to all be running to catch up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm glad we have M&A to help do it.
I think absolutely you're right. And we're all out of time, and let me just jump past here.
So, framework for community and regional development. Develop sub-state, city, and region-based strategies. Attend to key foundations for future economic success. Keys to economic success extend beyond business development to a lot of other things. Quality infrastructure, quality workforces, devise side-by-side strategies for business development and workforce development, chart your progress using peers, and establish an area economic roundtable to join up your leadership. So, anyway, all done. Yeah, we'll put that up. I'll let the nonprofit association know. I'll just put it on an isolated website and tell them, and so you ask them. Thanks a lot.